Welcome to the University of Arkansas Clinton School of Public Service. My name is Skip Rutherford and I am Dean of the school, and we are honored to have you with us this evening. We have a capacity crowd, both upstairs and downstairs, and that is fitting because we have a very historic and very popular and very interesting program tonight. We are grateful to partner with AETN. We've done so in the past. We will do so in the future. What a wonderful asset and joy for our state to have AETN here, and it's a major contributor. Before we start the program officially, we have a about 15-minute film from the Smithsonian about the Enola Gay. We think you'll like it, so let's watch the movie.
When we went overseas, realized this was June, my letters to home, I'm telling my folks that I'll be there a year. This is what I thought. Now, I do know my friends that were in the Navy and they thought it was a long war. They thought it was going to last at least another year. I think all of us at that time thought we were in for a long war, and a dirty war, a mean war, and a killing war. Each island we got closer to Japan, the casualties increased.
Now the war went on and was going on, and you have to understand that during that period, people in the service were just really fed up with this. But under those conditions, if we could do anything to significantly shorten the war or end it, why, I think anybody would have jumped at that possibility. We can talk to young people, explain it to them and things, but until they've been involved in it, they just can't understand what a total country effort this was, the war was, and everybody was involved in it. Not just the people in the service, although that involved just about everybody between the ages of 18 and 35, but the people working on the home front, building airplanes, building tanks, building weapons of war. That's all it was.
We're in General Ent's office, and he is instructing me as to my assignment. You are going to organize and train a unit to drop these atomic bombs simultaneously in both Europe and Japan. And he told me about using my my code word of silver plate, and cautioned me. He said, "Paul, you got a tremendous amount of responsibility there. You got a tremendous amount of authority. Be careful of how you use it." I was never challenged. Nobody ever asked me, can I drop the bomb? Or, have you made a decision who's going to drop it? If they had, I'd have told them yes. Decision was made the first day I heard about it, and that's going to be me.
Paul told us we were going to drop a new type of weapon. He said that if anybody wanted to back out, nothing would be said. Nobody backed out.
I was brought into the radio shack. You're supposed to be Colonel Tibbetts' radio operator. How many hours have you had in the air? I said, 10 at radio school. I was naive. So I didn't know what I was supposed to expect.
Wendover, Utah appeared to me when I got there as the ideal location. Isolated out on the Nevada state line, on the salt flats of Utah, and there wasn't very much there. There was nothing to attract any particular attention out there, and I thought, this is the place I want to be. It would be easy to keep a secret sitting at Wendover.
Nobody ever mentioned the word nuclear. Nobody ever mentioned the word atomic. We just knew it was going to be a big explosion, a lot of destructive force.
During the bomb runs and tests, we were trying to get the ballistics for the two weapons. For the airspeed, you'd have to put in a different drift. You'd have to put in a different trail, which is how far the bomb, where it comes out from behind the airplane. But it took me, I'd say, 2 to 3 months with the background I had to actually realize and believe that they were actually onto something as big as I'd heard. Because with my background, as far as me to visualize it, one bomb could do what they said.
My organization, the 509th Composite Group, was ready to go to war by the month of May, 1945. And I sent the word in to move the 509th organization overseas. I wanted them to get shot at. I wanted them to experience possible emergencies and everything before they had an atom bomb in their airplane and were really playing for keeps. I wanted the Japanese to see individual airplanes. I wanted them to think maybe that most of those single airplanes that they were looking at were reconnaissance airplanes, because they weren't interested in reconnaissance airplanes at that time. Hiroshima was definitely a military objective. It was also the place in which they were assembling all of their military equipment to resist an invasion.
We were given information about air-sea rescue units and what we would do in case of trouble with the bomb, trouble with the airplane, trouble from enemy action. Had the final briefing at midnight, followed by then the breakfast and down to the flight line.
You knew it was big. It was going to be a big one, and so you were, I think, you were at a level a little higher than you do on a conventional mission. The biggest part of that after the briefing was coming out to the aircraft and seeing this tremendous amount of people around it, Klieg lights with shining all over the airplane, a big crowd of people out there. You know, you were the center of attention. You were the monkeys in the zoo.
And I was sitting there in the seat ready to start engines. And of course, some of the cameras were still out there. And I stuck my head out to ask them, please remove the cameras and the floodlights and all that so we could start cranking up. And at the same time, somebody yelled at me and said, hey, wave at us.
Everyone to the field!
I had a bunch of lives on board this airplane that I had to give careful consideration to. And in that regard, I couldn't help but reflect on Chaplain Downey's prayer.
Clear the field! Right there!
We pray thee that the end of the war may come soon, and that once more we may know peace on earth. May the men who fly this night be kept safe in thy care, and may they be returned safely to us. We shall go forward, trusting in thee, knowing that we are in thy care now and forever. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
I watched the airspeed indicator go past 160 that night, and we were still on the ground. Those wheels were turning. But I was confident that this was the only way to do it so that I could control with the tail if I had to. So when I'm going down there and I kept it past that magic 140 that you were used to, he started to grab the yoke and pull back on it. He said, lift it off. And I told him, I said, keep your damn hands off of that yoke. I'm flying this airplane.
Weather was very clear. We could see the coast of Japan from probably 75 to 100 miles away. And then I went up and looked over Tom's shoulder, and we compared notes in the city and made sure we had the right target. And picked out the bridge that was the aiming point, and then I went back and sat down. And it was in the bombardier's hands at that point.
But after flying as much as I had in Europe and planning missions from the very start, I knew a lot about picking up aiming points. It's something that I could pick up as a bombardier real easy. And that the bridge that I picked out was right in the, almost in the center of the city. It made an ideal aiming point.
And then for 5 minutes, I was watching his head there, and he was looking at me and chewing on his cigar. And he said, "Ain't a damn thing I can do. Nothing. It's going right down the track." And he'd look up at the bomb sight. It's on course. And it was on course until it left the airplane.
Well, I raised up a little and looked out right out over the nose, and Paul immediately started to turn, but I could still see it because I wanted to make sure it was clear of the aircraft, because I'd had some trouble with something that tumbled here that I was when I was the window was dropping them. So I wanted to make sure it was falling clear, and it was. It was going straight in.
And we were still pretty close to it then, the mushroom cloud. It showed the cloud rising to about our level, which was in the neighborhood of 33,000 feet, if I remember right. And it also showed the turbulence engulfing the city and moving out into the foothills. And the only thing that I could see of Hiroshima was one of the docks and the bay.
Colonel Tibbets, will you tell us some of your reactions over the target?
Well, as the bomb left the airplane, we took over manual control, made an extremely steep turn to try and put as much distance between ourselves and the explosion as possible. After we felt the explosion hit the airplane, that is the concussion waves, we knew that the bomb had exploded, everything was a success, so we turned around to take a look at it. The sight that greeted our eyes was quite beyond what we had expected, because we saw this cloud of boiling dust and debris below us with this tremendous mushroom on top. Beneath that was hidden the ruins of the city of Hiroshima.
When we came back, we knew that war was over. There was no way that war could keep going on when what we saw had happened. But they would not admit to the fact. They didn't admit to Hiroshima. They finally admitted to Nagasaki, but even after they gave up, ceded, they didn't show any overt acts to stop the war. So it was necessary to have two bombs, and I think that we back on the ground that didn't fly the second mission were pretty doggone proud of that group of people too.
I think you have to say that you wish the war could have ended without flying missions of this type, but in the long run, I am thoroughly convinced that the use of this weapon did shorten the war and save lives overall, both Allied lives and Japanese lives. Because if you play what if, and you say what would have happened if the bomb had not have been dropped, and you start looking at, fire bombs would have continued, even without an invasion, the casualties would have been very, very heavy.
War is bad, horrible, and even in Europe, my intention over there is the same thing as Hiroshima, was to help get the war over, to end the killing.
It's a devastating thing. It came as a tremendous surprise. It shocked people. If people can see the attitude that we have, the patriotism we had at the time, the sincerity of our beliefs today, I wanted to do everything that I could to subdue Japan. That was the attitude of the United States in those years.
That 509th Composite Group was a great
group of patriotic men. They all put their backs to the wheel, and we succeeded in bringing that carnage to an end, and everybody got to go home.
Good evening, and thanks for being here this evening. My name is Don Hale. I'm from El Dorado, and I'm proud to serve as the chairman of the Arkansas Educational Television Network. And we're especially delighted that you've chosen to be here this evening as we have this tremendous speaker. First of all, I'd like to say we apologize for any technical difficulties and hope that you enjoyed the film anyway. It is with great pleasure that I have the distinct honor to introduce Major Van Kirk. Dutch Van Kirk was born February 27, 1921 in Northumberland, Pennsylvania. He graduated from navigation school in April of 1942 and was commissioned as a second lieutenant. Van Kirk was assigned to the 97th Bomb Squad flying B-17 missions over England. Van Kirk flew 58 missions over England and North Africa before returning to the United States. There he was assigned to the navigation training and became the group navigation coordinator in the 509th Composition Group training for the atomic bomb delivery. Quietly, in 1945, the group started moving overseas to the Pacific island of Tiananmen. On August 6, 1945, Van Kirk served as navigator of the first atomic bombing mission. At 2:30 a.m., the Enola Gay lifted off the North Field en route for Hiroshima. At exactly 9:15:15, the world's first atomic bomb exploded. When the Enola Gay landed back on the Tiananmen Island, generals, a large group of brass, a contingent of jubilant GIs greeted this crew. Among his many distinctions, he has earned the Silver Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 14 Oak Leaf clusters, and many, many theater awards. It is my privilege to introduce someone who exhibits the greatest characteristics from the greatest generation, Major Dutch Van Kirk.
I think it's on now. Yes, it is. I never know which button to push. That was my problem in the service, too, that sort of thing. And anybody that wants to promote me to a general, they can do it anytime. Just make sure the back pay goes along with it. That's all I can say. If you people don't mind, I'm going to use this stool up here because the first thing to wear out on a man is knees, and mine are gone, and this sort of thing. If I knew I could get 2 more years of wear out of a set of new knees, I'd get a set of new knees, but no doctor will give me a guarantee, so I'm not going to do it, and this sort of thing. Well, I hardly know what to talk to you about. There's so much to tell you about the 509th Group and about the dropping the atomic bomb and everything, so I'll warn you right off. This is nothing I've written down, nothing I've ever made up or anything of that type. It's all up here in my head. getting kind of poor, I might add. But if I don't answer anything you want to know about the atomic bomb or dropping the atomic bomb or anything of that type, keep in mind, ask me the questions later on. I will answer any questions you've asked. And I was told one time that, what is it, there are no indiscreet questions, only indiscreet answers. So I'll try not to give you any indiscreet answers. And if you need to answer anyone any more about, where's Bob Krause? Bob, you're around here someplace, aren't you? Bob's selling some books around here. He was. He's back in there? Bob Krause is selling books back there. Oh, there you are. And if you want anything, why, he's our pictorial historian of the 509th group. He has more pictures and more things about the 509th than any other individual. He wasn't there at the time, but he got all the pictures and everything from all the men. And he has a book that if you can buy it and read it and everything, it'll break your arm, though. It's too big, that sort of thing. So don't try to read it in bed, laying in bed at night. Now, as I said, I was going to sit down up here. I will always make sure it's behind me before I sit down and everything of that type. Well, I'm going to start off a little bit with telling you that my introducer here said I got out of navigation school in 1945. I joined the service just before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and was in navigation and pilot training over here at Sikeston, Missouri. And I didn't realize, I joined up, I passed everything that they said to pass and everything of that type. And I'll tell you how bad the country was in shape, how nonchalant they were about the war. They didn't call me for another year to come for training. And then all of a sudden they put me on a train in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, sent me out to Sikeston, Missouri. And 5 days later, after about 8 hours of training and everything, the guy crawled out of the airplane and says, "You're going to kill yourself, do it yourself." And that sort of thing. So that meant that you go ahead and fly into solo. Anyhow, I was trying to be a pilot. I washed out, as a lot of people do. And then I was going to join the RAF, that's the Royal Air Force, fly for the British. And there's an old captain there, and he called me in. He says, "Mr. Van Kirk, I understand you're going to go join the RAF." And I said, "Yes, sir, that's correct." And he says, "Well, it's been nice knowing you. You'll be dead within a year." Got my attention. Yes, it got my attention. So I decided to go. He said, "I suggest you go to navigation school." That's how I got there. I got down to navigation school, and I found out, hey, they didn't have any navigators. And so they came to us, and they said, named 30 names. They said, "You're going to go through this navigation school in half the regular time." I said, "Oh, that's a good trick." The problem was they forgot, and they doubled up on the calisthenics and everything else. And they almost killed us. Running back and forth and going to all the calisthenics and everything. We finally got them to stop that. Graduated from navigation school, went over to Sarasota, Florida, where they have a group over there getting all trained to go overseas. And we joined that group and ended up over in England. I was on the first mission, first B-17 mission, the bomber mission, that's bomber mission, out of England over occupied European territory. And we did not have any fighters to take us in at that time. We'd had no fighter escort or anything of that type. "Hey, Masala, how are you? Nice seeing you here. Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" There was that lady over there. Her husband was on our crew over in England and Africa and everything else. And that's quite a surprise. Thank you. That's nice. But in any event, we flew over there. By the way, she can tell more stories than I can. But you just tell some of Charlie's stories, and you'll do fine, Marcella. That's all I'll say. But in any event, over there we didn't have to have any fighters to take us in. The RAF used to take us in as far as they could. Then they'd turn around and go home. We had to go the rest of the way on our own. And then they'd meet us on the way back, coming back out. And all the RAF guys used to tell us, "Meeting you guys on the way back out is the most hazardous duty in the world. You will shoot at anything." But there's one key factor there. As long as it was me shooting at them, they didn't have to worry. I never hit anything in my life. Tom Fairby and I used to have the reputation of being the navigator and bombardier that shot the most ammunition at enemy airplanes without hitting a damn thing. The safest place for a German pilot to be was flying, shooting at us and everything of that type. Well, we had a few notable firsts over there. We took General Mark Clark down to talk to the French so that they wouldn't oppose our landings when we landed in North Africa then in November. And then we came back to England, and then we took 5 of our airplanes, and we took General Eisenhower and his staff down there to command the North African invasion. And no, I won't tell it, but Marcella might, but about what our tail gunner did to Willie Titsworth, was his name, did with General Eisenhower, but I'm not going to tell it. But I will recall one thing about that trip. We got down to Gibraltar, and they told us to go up in the rock and watch the Straits of Gibraltar that night. And one of the most stirring sights you've ever seen in your life. The invasion fleet was steaming through the Straits of Gibraltar on a nice moonlight night. It was a small fleet compared to what we had at Normandy, or what we would have had at Japan, or what we had at Okinawa or at Iwo Jima or anything of that type. But to see that fleet steaming through there, knowing that nothing would stop them, nothing. And the next day there was going to be a battle. One of the most stirring sights, as I said, I have ever seen. And then down there in North Africa, I'm trying to get through this early part in a hurry and everything. And in North Africa, we had 5 B-17s down there. We thought we ought to be able to do some good. So we went to the RAF group captain there and said, you know, we ought to be able to bomb something, but we need bombs and we need gasoline. And we didn't have either. And we didn't have any ground crews either. So very nice man. He gave us a truck. We could go down to the docks, get our own bombs, haul them out to the plane, get our own gasoline, packed in 5-gallon cans, haul it out to the airplane, load our own bombs in the B-17, refuel the B-17 out of 5-gallon cans, and that was a lot of 5-gallon cans and everything of that type, and then take off and fly the mission. And we had very few of our ground crew there, and Charlie was one of them and everything else. And I forget how many 5-gallon cans it took to load a B-17, but it was a lot. Well, then we all come back to this country, and I finally end up, I'm stationed at a navigation training school over here at Monroe, Louisiana. And one night I got a call from Colonel Tibbets saying that he was assigned a new job. He was going to command the new group. It was going overseas, and we were going to do something. He said, I can't tell you what it is, but if it works, he says, I could tell you we're going to either significantly shorten or end the war. And I said, yeah, I've heard that before too, and this sort of thing. But anyhow, I said, yeah, I'll join you. I says, you know, this navigation school is getting dull. So on that, Paul Tibbets and I, to this day, well, not just right now, he's on his deathbed today. I haven't argued with him lately, but up till about 2 months ago, we used to argue about whether or not I volunteered for this job. And he always says, you volunteered for this job. And I said, yes. But when I got my orders, they were dated 2 days before your telephone call. So much for the volunteering. So we went out to Wendover, Utah to train for dropping atomic weapons. And I thought, get out there, there's a great big airfield with one airplane on it, a Piper Cub. I thought, boy, are we going to drop something here? And this sort of thing. But then shortly thereafter, we got an entire squadron from the 504th Group. They have already been trained. Can you all hear me up there, by the way? I forget I have to almost swallow this thing to make it work. But if you can't hear, why, holler out. I can't hear you. If I hear you, I'll answer you. But anyhow, we got over there training. Now, I'm not going to go into all we did in training and everything of that type, just to shorten this up. But I recall one of the early meetings we had with the scientists. This was, January 45, something like that. We were sitting talking to the scientists, and the scientist looked at us and said, we think the airplane will be okay if you're 9 miles away when the bomb explodes. And I looked at him and I says, what do you mean you think? And this sort of stuff. We don't know. He says, some people are saying you have to be 50 miles away, in which case you're dead, and that sort of thing. Some people are saying it isn't any distance you can get away from it. Some people are saying it's going to start a reaction in the atmosphere and everything of that type. So he had all kinds of things, but he says, the consensus is 9 miles. So our goal thereafter was to do something that would get us 9 miles away. First thing we did was decide to use stripped down airplanes, take the B-20. We couldn't do it in a regular B-29. Take the regular B-29, take all the guns out of the plane, take all the turrets out of the airplane, take any weight out of the airplane we could get out of it and throw it away. And then we started adding things to it, fuel injection engines, snap-up weapon, bomb bay doors, reversible pitch props, all those things, which don't mean a thing to you. Believe me, they made the airplane better. That way we could get up higher and we could go faster and we could get away from the bomb when it exploded. So we got those airplanes and we trained. There's a few stories that go with it. We had a code name. Paul referred to it in the videotape here, a code name Silverplate. We were supposed to get anything we wanted after we invoked the code name of Silverplate. So we wanted 15 new B-29s built to our specifications. This happened after one of our airplanes. We were taking the turrets out and everything left, taking them out and then putting a patch over the hole by our mechanics out at Wendover. And one night, the B-29 is the first pressurized airplane. I should point that out. So one night, one of our planes was flying out over San Francisco, and the patch they put over the hole tore loose. We scattered parts of parachutes and anything that was loose in the airplane. We scattered all over the city of San Francisco. I just found out a few minutes ago that one of my navigators, Jack Wadowski, got it, and we don't know how Jack ever got a skull fracture or anything of that type, because he should have been out of the line of fire, but his section hit him in the head and he got a skull fracture from it. That's the day we decided those planes weren't good enough. We needed 15 new B-29s. So Tippett sent in the order for request for 15 new B-29s, rejected. Now he puts a code name Silverplate on it, sends it in again, comes back, rejected again. This was unheard of, for heaven's sake. So word finally got to General Hap Arnold, Chief of the Air Force. We got our 15 new B-29s. Now the story goes, I can't verify this because I wasn't physically present at the time. The story goes, however, that Hap Arnold used to have a staff meeting in his office every morning. And as the people would walk in, he'd say, good morning, General so-and-so, good morning, General so-and-so, shake all their hands and everything. This was a brigadier general who had turned us down for our 15 new B-29s after the code name Silverplate. And when he walked in, Hap grabbed him, shook his hands, good morning, Lieutenant Colonel. I don't know how long the guy stayed a lieutenant colonel or anything of that type, but he got the message real fast that when he got something with a code name Silverplate on it, it was not to be ignored or anything of that type. Well, we did a lot of our training at Wendover, and we had a lot of the scientists out there completing their work in the bomb. I have to tell you, when we started this, we didn't know whether we were going to have a bomb to drop or not. They thought we would, but the Manhattan Project hadn't anywhere near completed it. They sent us things to drop to see what the bomb dropping characteristics would be and everything of that type, and they had some wild imaginations. I remember they sent us one that was looked like a telephone pole as long as this room and everything. We couldn't even get in the B-29, and we hung it on the outside and dropped it, and it tumbled all over the place, and everything of that type. So thank God that one didn't work and everything. But while we were out there, we tested all of their concepts of what the atomic bomb would look like when we got it made. Well, then we went overseas, and we went over to Tinian, one of the Marianas Islands, about 60 miles north of Guam. We moved into nice quarters over there, and a fellow back here is just telling me his father is a CB over there. And I says, well, I finally slept in the bed he built for himself, because the CBs built very nice quarters for themselves. We kicked them out and took them over for ourselves. And we had all of our airplanes over there. We had guards on all of our airplanes and everything. Here we were. We had the best airplanes on the island in a secret place with guards on all of our airplanes, and we weren't doing anything. We were not the most popular people on the island of Tinian. I can tell you that right now. We had General, I'll tell you a little story I hadn't told before. General, he's 86 years old. I'll think of it yet. Some general over there anyhow. He was our commander of the bomb wing and this sort of stuff. And he decided he was going to inspect one of our airplanes one day. And he got out of his Jeep and started walking up to the airplane, and there's a guard on the plane, and he says to the guard, he says, I'm going to inspect this airplane. And the guard says, sir, you're not authorized to inspect this airplane. And the general says, I'm General Whiteley. He says, I'm going to inspect, hey, it just came to me. General Whiteley, he says, I'm going to inspect this airplane. And the guard says, sir, I know who you are. But he says, you're not authorized to inspect this airplane. And the guy says, well, it's in my under my command, I think I can expect it and this sort of thing. So he started taking 2 steps forward, and he heard 2 clicks, click, click. And it's the guy charging his gun. And he backed off in a real hurry, thank God he did, and everything else. He came up to our headquarters, came into Paul Tibbets' office, says, would that guard have shot me? Paul says, you're damn well right he would have. And the guy says, I'm glad I stopped, and everything of this type. But that's the way things were at the time. And at the time also, we were still flying missions that were this, we used bombs that were the same size, weight, and shape as the atomic bomb, except they were loaded with high explosives. And we'd assign our crews a specific factory in a specific city up there to go up and bomb under conditions that we expected to encounter when we dropped the atomic bomb. And then we didn't just assign them a city, go up there. Anybody can hit a city. Well, almost anybody. And this sort of thing, but go up and hit this city under these conditions. So that was our continuing training, but we were doing it during the daytime. They were flying at night, so we weren't doing it. A lot of nasty poems written about us and everything over there. And then finally on July 16th, everything started to pop, because you recall on July 16th out at Alamogordo, New Mexico, they tested the first plutonium weapon. We never tested the uranium weapon. I got you confused now. Let me try to straighten it out. There are 2 types of bombs, uranium-235 bombs and plutonium bombs. We dropped on our flight the only uranium-235 bomb ever dropped. In our bomb, we used all of the U-235 ever made at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And this is a big, massive plant. It's as big as a city out here and everything. We used all the uranium-235 ever made there during their entire operation in one bomb. All subsequent bombs were plutonium bombs, and the bomb tested in New Mexico was a plutonium bomb. They put it on a tower out there about 500-foot elevation and exploded it and everything else. I'm not sure how everything else in that test went. But I do know one thing. I know the bravest man in the world was sitting on top of that, babysitting it all night long. He was the fellow who had invented the fusing for the bomb itself. He knew that fusing could be set off by electrical storms. And he was assigned to sit on top of that tower reading a whodunit with a 60-watt bulb all night long, and there were electrical storms all around him and this sort of stuff. He was either brave or crazy. I'm not sure which, or anything of that type. Well, then also about that now we knew we had something that we could drop and everything else. A lot of the people came over there to Tinian then with pictures and everything to show us what had happened, what we could expect to happen when we dropped the bomb at wherever we were going to drop it. And a lot of motion picture cameras, news film reels, and everything of that type. We got there and the film reels wouldn't work. Either these guys can make atomic bombs, and they couldn't get a doggone new film reel to work and that sort of thing. So anyhow, we did without it and everything of that type. We also started getting our orders from the primarily the Manhattan Project about what we had, where we should drop the bombs and how. We were assigned 4 different targets in Japan on which to drop these bombs. They had never before been dropped by any bomb, by any other means. We didn't want to drop it on Tokyo because Tokyo was burned down already. Hiroshima was the first one we wanted to hit. Kokura was the second one we wanted to hit. Nagasaki was the third one we wanted to hit. And Nagata, almost a useless target, was the 4th one we wanted to hit. But we were running out of targets by that time over Japan and everything like that. We were also told that we had to drop instruments at the same time we dropped the bomb. These were instruments that were on parachutes in packages that the scientists had devised, which would measure the force of the blast. These instruments were dropped by parachute out of a second plane, and it's out of the Japanese to this day will say that the bomb was dropped by parachute. It wasn't. What they saw were the instruments coming down by parachute. That was the second plane we had with us. And a third plane, that was Chuck Sweeney, by the way, on our flight. Our third plane we had was George Marquardt, and George had the instrument by the camera plane. And they had a big, one of these fast-tax cameras up in the nose of his plane, supposed to run for 20 seconds only, had to be aimed just right at the target when the bomb exploded and everything else. He went with us up there until within about 25 miles and flew a big circle, supposed to be pointed right at the target when the bomb exploded. We don't know what happened, but the camera didn't work and that sort of thing, so we didn't get any pictures. Then we had three other planes which we took out. We put one plane over each target an hour ahead of us. One over Hiroshima, Buck Etherly, one over Kokura, and one over Nagasaki, so they could send the weather back. Those of you who flew over there, and I'm sure there are some of you people in the 20th Air Force who flew over there, knew that the weather over Japan was a little bit unusual. You could get up there and get a headwind sometime and not make hardly any headway at all. So you had to know how the weather was over your target, and that was their purpose, to get the weather over the target, radio it back to us so we could pick out the target that was clear and go in and bomb it. Okay, then the other things they told us. We had to drop the bomb visually. We could not take it up there and drop it by radar. We had to know where it was going. And if you took it up there and could not drop it visually, take it out and drop it in the ocean. Do not bring it back to the base with you. And this sort of thing. And that made a lot of sense also. The day after we dropped the bomb, a captain came into the operations at the office there, and I was on duty, and he came in, he said, "Any of you guys in here know anything about that bomb you dropped yesterday?" And I said, "Well, what do you want to know?" He said, "Well, I'm in charge of firefighting here in the island." He said, "If one of your planes crashes on takeoff, do we rush in and try to put out the fire, or do we turn around and run the other way?" So we talked about it a little while and decided it didn't make a damn bit of difference, and this sort of thing. So there you go. So anyhow, that's it. These are the other things we've had. They had to do that, and I think I told you all the orders we had. Just give me a minute here to recollect. Hell, it's been 62 years. I can't be expected to pull it back all at once. I think that's all they told us. Well, then we decided, the other thing we decided, incidentally, those of you who are over there know that every night we took off one of those big firebomb raids up over Japan. We would lose about 5 or 6 airplanes at the end of the runway. An airplane would be going down the runway, it went full power, it hit the ocean, didn't get off the ground, and it was loaded with firebombs and aviation gas. The results were obvious and everything of that type. 5 or 6 every night. So Captain Parsons, this is Navy Captain Parsons, Deke Parsons, who had more to do with making our particular bomb than any other individual. Notice this every night, and he says, "I'm going to try to arm the bomb in flight." So he practiced it against the orders of General Groves, I might say, and everything else. He practiced so that he could go back in the bomb bay, he and Morris Jepson could go back in the bomb bay and put the black powder and everything into the bomb that it had. Now, the fact we were carrying an atomic bomb that night didn't bother me very much. The fact he was back there fooling around with black powder, that bothered me, and everything of that type. So anyhow, that's what we decided to do. So then the day of the mission comes and everything else, and they call us about 11 o'clock, 10, 11 o'clock, I forget which. And we went over for the general briefing and everything of that type, and they told us where we were going to drop, what we would get to fly to toward Japan until we got our weather information from weather planes and drop the bomb. He says how we dropped the bomb, where the air-sea rescue was, and everything of this. And I always remember Tom Furby, our bombardier, kind of slept a lot and this sort of thing. But he always says, "You know where those air-sea rescue people are, every one of them." So I don't want to get my feet wet and everything of that type. So that was his worry that night. And then they told us, after they gave us all this briefing and everything, they said, "Now go back and get some sleep, and we'll call you later on for breakfast and a final briefing." How they expected to tell you you're going to go out and drop the first atomic bomb and then go back and get some sleep is absolutely beyond me. I know that Tibbetts didn't sleep, I know that Farabee didn't sleep, and I know that I didn't sleep, because we were all three in the same poker game. The bad part about it is I don't even know who won. At that point, it wasn't very important, for heaven's sakes. So anyhow, they came and got us about 10 o'clock or so, and we went over to the final briefing where they gave us the final weather reports and everything of that type. And then into the mess hall for our final talks. Oh, you remind me of feeding a condemned man breakfast, for Christ's sake. And then we went in for breakfast, and I always remember Paul Tibbets loved pineapple fritters. I hated them. What did we have for breakfast that morning? Pineapple fritters. And I ate them because I knew I wasn't going to get anything more to eat for about at least 12 hours. And so then we all got in trucks and went down to the airplane. And that was our first surprise. We get down to the airplane was all lit up by keg lights, everybody out there interviewing, everybody taking pictures and everything of that type. And we couldn't understand it. This wasn't supposed to happen. It's supposed to be a big secret. The point I'm making here is this was not done by the media. There was not an ounce of media on the island. They were all purposely kept away. One man on the island, media man, knew about the whole thing. Bill Lawrence of the New York Times. No other media people were there. They were all down on Guam, 60 miles away. And we didn't meet them until 2 days later. And they were a little mad, let's put it that way, and everything of that type. But anyhow, all this recording done, all this picture taking and everything, was done for the Manhattan Project. General Groves wanted a written record of the fact of the takeoff of that airplane and everything of that type. So then after all the picture taking, by the way, when we come out to the plane, up another little aside, when I looked at the plane first and saw it, I said, gee, that looks like a Hollywood premiere out there. And Dick Nelson, who comes from Southern California, piped up and says, it looks like a supermarket opening to me. So much for that. Well, we finally got all the pictures taken, everything all done and everything. We got in the airplane to take off, and we were very heavily overloaded that night. We were about 10,000 pounds over the max gross weight of a B-29. And I think the normal max gross weight was about 135. We were about 145. Everybody asked why. We had the bomb in the front bomb bay. That was a big weight right in the front bomb bay. We had to put a lot of weight in our back bomb bay to get the weight bounce right on the airplane. And that was all filled with gasoline bay. We didn't need it, but we had to take it along just to get our weight bounce right and everything of that type. But Tibbets had kept the plane on the ground that night to build up a lot of speed. In this film here, you heard him say he had it controlled by the tail. That's one of the reasons that B-29 had that big tail sticking up. And he had to get up a lot of speed to do that. And he, quote, incidentally, this all about the feud, the so-called feud between Tibbets and Lewis all came about after the war. Everybody was buddy-buddy at that time. But Lewis did try to pull it off at 140 miles an hour. And I don't know what speed we were at, but I did know Paul was out of runway when he lifted off the ground. There was nothing underneath my feet but water at that particular point and everything of that type. So then we started climbing very slowly up there, and Parsons stayed down low altitude to Iwo Jima. Parsons went back in the bomb bay, loaded the bomb, and armed the bomb, I should say. I say arming the bomb. We didn't arm the bomb in the literal sense. It was putting the gunpowder in there and everything. The bomb operated on a very, very simple principle. You had a milled piece of uranium-235 up here in the nose. You had a short cannon. You had another piece of your milled piece of uranium-235 back here, and you just fired the cannon. You fired one piece into the other. It became a critical mass, and you had an explosion. These things are very easy to make. I can tell you all kinds of books. I tell you how to make them. Just hope the terrorists never get a hold of them. And you have to get a lot of good uranium-235 also, and or plutonium. But anyhow, ours operated on that principle, so it was a very, he loaded the black powder and stuff in it instead of just arming it. And then Morris Jepson was with his assistant, sat there on the floor with us behind. He had a green box checking the electrical circuit of the bomb. Had a lot of green lights on top. I remember turning to Morris Jepson one time and saying, Morris, what happens if those green lights go out and the red lights come on? He says, we're in a hell of a lot of trouble and this sort of thing. But anyhow, we're most of us up in the front of the plane and everything of that type. So that was just a matter of flying the plane. It was the easiest mission I ever flew in my life compared to over Europe and everything of that type. We got to Iwo Jima, made one circle of the island. Sweeney was on our right wing, George Marquardt was on our left, so we take off at Japan. And we climb in very slowly, and when we get up there, the weather was very clear. The weather was perfect, as a matter of fact. I could see the coast of Japan from a good 75, probably 100 miles away. We went in, crossed the island of Shikoku, crossed the inland sea, and I could pick out the city of Hiroshima from a good 75 miles away. We went back, and we hit our initial point, and we hit our initial point. We made a right turn because we went a bomb on a westerly heading, and I went up over. We were all up there. Tibbets was up, I was up, Farabee was up, Parsons was up. We're all looking to make sure we had all identified the target. We'd had the right target. I remember one day I bombed the wrong target over in Europe. It wasn't fun and that sort of thing. But anyhow, we wanted to make sure we had the right target, so we all went up and looked. And then I went back and sat down. And you heard Paul then talking. The plane was on course right on for the target all the way through. Bomb sight was flying the airplane at that particular point, going right straight in. And when the bomb left the airplane, there was a surge. 9,400 pounds had left the plane all of a sudden. So there was a surge, and Paul flipped off the automatic pilot and took manual control. We had practiced a way to get away from it. 150-degree turn, steep as he could make it, and lose 1,000 feet in the turn, push the throttles forward, and run like the devil. That's what you had to do to get away from it. So we flew away from it, and it took 43 seconds from the time the bomb left the airplane until it exploded at about 1,800 feet above the ground. The bomb operated on 3 fuses: timing fuse, barometric fuse, timing fuse. We didn't want it to go off too close to the plane. Barometric fuse, and then the third one was a radar proximity fuse. Radar proximity fuse operated on a very unusual frequency. But if the Japanese had by accident gotten onto it, they could have exploded a bomb in the airplane. We didn't think that was a good idea. And so we had a guy, Jake Peaser, the third guy addition to our crew, sitting in the back of the plane, monitoring the frequencies and everything to make sure that no Japanese operations were going on those frequencies. So anyhow, we're going away from the bomb. Suddenly there's a bright flash in the plane. The bomb had exploded. It had worked, thank God, and this sort of thing. And all you saw of that was a bright flash in the airplane. We kept on going away from it, kept on going in that direction, and very shortly thereafter, we got the first shock wave. And the first shock wave was measured at about 3 Gs at 30,000 feet in a B-29. Now that doesn't seem much if you're a fighter pilot, but to me in a B-29 at 30,000 feet, sitting over Toga, Hiroshima, it seemed like a devil of a lot and everything of that type. So then we kept going away from it, and somebody called out flak. I don't know who it was. It wasn't me, I know that. Somebody called out flak, and the tail gunner called and said it was not flak, it was a shock wave, and here comes another one. The second one is not as sharp as the first one, not as heavy as the first one or anything of the type, but the bomb set up visible shock waves that the tail gunner could see and tell you when they were going to hit the airplane. The only way I can describe it is it was probably like you drop a pebble in a still pool of water, it sets up ripples coming out from it or something of that type. Well, after we were sure we weren't going to get any more of them, we banked a little bit and turned to take a look at the city of Hiroshima. And this large white cloud, mushroom cloud, it's so-called. Excuse me, I'm going to have to get something to wet here. The large white mushroom cloud that you've all seen pictures of had formed. It was up well above our altitude. I'd estimate it was already up to 40,000 feet. And around the base of that cloud, it looked like something burning in there. It was all different colors of a furnace that was on purples, pinks, blues, everything of that type. It was obvious that a tremendous amount of energy had been released down below. And then when you look down further and took a look at the city of Hiroshima, you could make absolutely no visual observation. The entire city was covered with black smoke, dust, and dirt, and everything of this type, so that there's just no sense hanging around there. So I flew a little bit in the southeast quadrant of the city. We did not circle, just a little bit in the southeast quadrant. you could see that you were not going to be able to make any visual observation, so we turned around and went home. And 3 things happened when we got home. Number 1, I did not get there in time for the free beer and hot dogs they had at a party. That's number 1. Number 2, it's the first time I'd ever been debriefed by a 4-star general. Tui Spots was there to debrief us and this sort of thing. So that was our mission. And so now the next time that we come up and we wanted to drop the second one, we thought we'd get some immediate reaction from the Japanese. They did not even admit that one of their cities was missing. They ignored the whole thing about the bomb. I have to tell you why. They had an atomic program too. They were trying to develop a bomb. They were trying to develop a bomb on U-235, the same as the first one we dropped. And they thought, based on their program, there'd only be enough U-235 for one weapon. They didn't have to worry about a second one. That's the reason why the second bomb had to be, we thought that the second bomb had to be dropped. The second bomb was a plutonium bomb. Fat Man, operating on an entirely different principle. Had a line of fuses around the nose of it, and they all had to be timed explosions, all of it precisely, and this sort of thing. It compressed a mass of uranium into a critical mass, and that's how we got our explosion there. It was a more powerful bomb than we had at Hiroshima. They got 3 shock waves there. We only got 2 at Hiroshima. I'm not going to tell you much about that mission because it was a complete foul-up. Our mission was picture perfect, not because of me or anything of that type. We had no problem. It went exactly according to plan. Their mission was fouled up from the word go. They tried to pull a high-altitude rendezvous. I told them it wouldn't work. It didn't, and this sort of thing. And then they waited there for longer than they should have for the rendezvous with the instrument plane and the photo plane, 35 minutes instead of 5 minutes. Then they went on to Kokur, which was their primary target. The weather had turned sour. They couldn't see the bomb there. They tried anyhow. 3 runs, all the time burning fuel at Otto Rich, burning up their chewing up fuel to beat the devil. Finally, the flight engineer gets Chuck's attention and says, "Major, you're running out of gas." They decided to go on to Nagasaki, line up on a radar run against instructions. At the last minute, the clouds opened up. The clouds opened up, and Kermit Behan saw the ground, and he let the bomb go, and he says, "I dropped the bomb visually." He knows he didn't. We know he didn't, but the war's over. Why make a big fuss about it? So, and he missed a target. I won't say he missed a target. We missed a target by about 5 miles or more there. But a lot of lives were saved because of that miss in Nagasaki. So a lot of lives that people who would have been suffered the consequences of an atomic bomb dropping were saved by that miss there in Nagasaki. Just a few words here about why we dropped the atomic bombs. Somebody told me here tonight, I don't know where, that some HBO people were just around here and they said some nice things about me. I don't know why. I told them the documentary was the worst I'd ever seen and everything of that type. But anyhow, they apparently thought I did all right. But it was a program that they had done on the survivors of Hiroshima. Now, you know, it was horrible if you're living in Hiroshima. It's horrible any place. And they had a lot of things there, and one of the things I expressed, that they showed me a lot of pictures of Hiroshima. And I said, you know, these aren't pictures only of Hiroshima. They're pictures of war. I said, I could have showed you similar pictures, not caused by the atomic bomb, but they're pictures of war. And if you don't want things like this, don't have wars and do away with that. But that's the approach, rather than just trying to get away from it and outlaw atomic bombs and everything else, because they're too easy to make. It's that simple. And Hiroshima was a military target. Hiroshima had within it 100 numbered military targets, the most important of which were the Japanese, I don't know how do you do this, Japanese Army, 6th Army Corps was headquarters there, had their headquarters right in the city and everything else. They were the defenders of Japan in the event of invasion. And that's why we wanted to hit that. Hiroshima was where all the materiel and everything that the Japanese had was being saved for that last big battle on the beaches. And let me also say this. The atomic bombs did not win the war. They were influential, but Japan was a beaten nation before we ever dropped the atomic bombs. 85% of the industrial capacity of Japan had been burned down before we ever dropped the atomic bombs. They had nothing to fight with. Their Navy was gone, their Air Force, except for a few kamikazes. Their Air Force was gone, except for maybe 10,000 or so kamikazes. And all they had were very large land armies. And they were going to rely on them to fight the last big battle on the beaches in order to get better terms of surrender, and except within what they were offered by the Potsdam Conference. And that's what was happening there at that time. And I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't dropped the bomb. The war would not have ended August 14th. By the way, how many of you know that the largest single air raid mission of the war over Japan was flown after Nagasaki? Probably don't know that. You never probably even thought of it. We had 1,000 B-29s up over Japan that day. We had so many B-29s up there we couldn't even find targets for them all. We had to have multiple targets around there for them to have. We had one of the guys in our pilot, for Boxcar, but the plane that dropped the second bomb was named after him. Fred Bach was his name. And he always claims he dropped the last bomb of the war on a Toyota factory in Japan. I said he didn't do a very good job, but that's another story, and that sort of thing. But anyhow, that's what was going on there and everything. And the war would have gone on. I don't know whether it would have gone on for another month, another 2 months, 3 months, or whatever. But in the meantime, there are 10,000 people a week getting killed, mostly over in Japan, mostly in Japan and China and the other Asian countries. We only suffered heavy casualties when we had a campaign going on, this sort of thing. But they were getting it all the time. And the Chinese to this day, I can go to China, they love me, and this sort of thing. But that was what was happening at the time, and that's why we had to drop the bombs, end it as soon as we can, and try to stop that killing. And that's what we finally did. And now I'm going to get a drink of water, and if you have any questions, I will try to answer them. Yes, sir.
Japan was developing an atomic bomb on their occupied Korean peninsula. Did Japan, in fact, ignite a small but primitive atomic bomb sometime before August 45 at their factory in Korea?
No. But they did have a program. And one question always doesn't lead to a simple answer. These are multiple answers. But no, we went up to Japan. I flew up to Japan with some of our people and a bunch of the scientists. We went there with the scientists. I wasn't important at that time. The scientists wanted to go into Hiroshima and Nagasaki to see what had happened. And we had to land in Tokyo first. MacArthur proposed pushing our airplane over the dump and that sort of thing, because we weren't supposed to be there. And that sort of thing. But anyhow, we had to go up there. We landed in Tokyo. We gathered up as many of the scientists from the Japanese program as we could. And then we took them with us down to and flew over Hiroshima. We could not land there because there was no landing field nearby. Went down and landed at Nagasaki, where we went into the city, walked all around the city for 2 days, trying to survey what had happened and everything of that type. Stayed at a very nice little cottage-like down on the coast there and everything of that type. And, I mean, it was an interesting trip because, you know, there are a lot of the Japanese there who hadn't surrendered yet, and they wanted to come and give you their sword. I didn't want their damn swords and everything, but they tried to surrender to you. They gave us two trucks to go into the city, 1927 model Chevrolets. That's the best trucks they had. They both broke down before we ever got into the city, about a distance of about 20 miles. And but that's we were into the city. But from that I can say that with 90.999% certainty. But you know, maybe there could have been a little possibility, but I doubt it very, very much. A lot of people today say to me, "Well, didn't you get some radiation while you were in Nagasaki walking around like that, and I said, if I did, I'm going back and get more because I'm 86 years old now.
Right. Here he comes.
Oh, right here.
Wait for the microphone. Thank you.
Me?
Did you have any advanced navigational assistance beyond what you taught at Selman Field when you made that mission?
Did I have any advanced? I wasn't much of a navigator back in those days.
Well, did you use dead reckoning?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I was at Selman Field as an instructor there. That's what they said anyhow. Among other things, I was the lowest scoring guy at Selman Field in firing a .45. I beat one man. He was a base urologist.
Hold on. Wait for the mic.
I graduated at navigation school at Kelly Field, Texas. Where? Kelly Field. Believe it, they did have a navigation school back in the olden days. I think they later moved it to Honda.
Here we go.
Do you feel that the majority of literature and film on war, especially on World War II, accurately describes the realities of war?
No, it's not the way you talk, it's the way I hear. And this sort of thing. Please talk slower if you would.
Do you feel that the majority of literature and film on war, especially World War II, accurately describes the realities of war?
No. Well, let me compound that. Everything in Hollywood is dramatized. When you start, I sit up here and I start talking about the atomic bomb. I say, we dropped the atomic bomb, and you people all expected something very dramatic and everything of that type. Most dramatic thing that day was I spilled a cup of coffee on myself, and that sort of thing. It's not dramatized, it is just plain hard work. There is nothing that can be dramatized and filmed in Hollywood that'll make being shot at as realistic as it really is. I can assure you. I was lucky. I was in the air. If they hit me, it was over in a hurry and everything of that type. But you talk to these people who are in the infantry, on the ground, and this sort of thing, they can never make it horrible enough. Never. My most horrifying experiences was being dive bombed by German Stukas in North Africa. And you could look back the macadam road that you were running up and this sort of thing and see the sparks bouncing off the road coming up toward you. And this sort of thing. That's a day that, Marcel has heard this story, I'm sure, before. Tom Fairby and I took out across the fields, and there were small vineyards with small wires. The first one Tom Fairby hit, he flew for about 30 feet.
How far above Hiroshima were you when you dropped the bomb, and also how far away were you from the bomb when it exploded?
Good questions. We were at an altitude of 31,030, 31030, and that's about 6 miles, yes. That's as high as we could get in those days. We did not have these jets. You go down here, you get on the airport out here, you get on these airplanes, the guy says, I'm going to fly to New York today at 40,000 feet. I'd have given my right arm to get to 40,000 feet, for heaven's sakes, and this sort of thing. That's as high as we could get with the load we had and everything of that type. When the bomb exploded, I was looking at the radar set, so that's a pretty accurate gauge, 12 miles. We were 12 miles away from the bomb when it exploded. Yes, sir.
Did you have a computerized remote control for the guns on that B-29?
Sir, we didn't have any guns. We took them all out.
I see.
The only guns we had were our tail guns, and tail guns. The only ones we had were our tail guns. We took the turrets out, and everything else was taken out.
Standing in the back.
Could you talk a little bit about what you, as a crew, talked about, the banter between you guys just before and after you dropped the bomb?
Well, you know, when you're flying on a mission like that and you have all that time, the banter soon plays out and this sort of stuff. Dick Nelson was reading a whodunit. He was our radio operator sitting right across from me. Tom Farabee was sleeping. He usually was, and that sort of thing. I was a navigator. I was the only guy who was busy on the airplane and this sort of stuff. The navigator's the only one on the airplane that never slept and that sort of thing. The pilots were, Paul Tibbets went back and took a small nap. And I don't know whether you're acquainted with how a B-29 is built. You know, it's in two sections, front section, back section, and there's a tunnel. Yeah, about that big around. I used to be able to crawl through it. I couldn't get through it now, and this sort of thing. But that's if you wanted to go from front to back, that's how you got through. And the guys in the back would all be sleeping, so we'd have oranges and apples, and we'd roll them through the tunnel, trying to hit the wall, hit the guys in the back, and things of that type. But it was the usual type of things like that. There's nothing profound. Now, on the way back, everyone wants to know what the conversation was, and the predominant part of the conversation on the way home was, this war is over. We didn't see how the Japanese could ever stand up to a force like we had seen explode over Hiroshima and continue the war. But it did take a second bomb to do it.
Over here, Major.
You left from Tinian, and what I was concerned about, did you have any problems getting it from Los Alamos to Tinian?
The bomb, that is?
You needed it, didn't you?
But
you needed the bomb, didn't you?
Oh yeah. Well, the bomb was our bomb. They were two different ways. Our bomb, the uranium bomb, was taken from Los Alamos, put on a ship in, flown to Hamilton Field in California, taken down to San Francisco and put on a ship in the harbor there at San Francisco, the Indianapolis, cruiser Indianapolis. The cruiser Indianapolis delivered the bomb to Tinian. And that in itself, if you folks don't understand it, don't know it, is in itself a tragedy, because the cruiser Indianapolis then later left Tinian to go over to the Philippines and join the rest of the fleet. It went over there unescorted and everything. Wasn't warned about the Japanese submarines being in the area. It took two torpedoes on the way over there and went down within about 10 minutes. And then everything of that type. Loss of life, about 800 or so people. When Bob Krause is here, he does the same thing he does with me with a lot of the survivors of the Indianapolis. And it itself is a bad story. These people are floating around out there for 3 days in the ocean, being eaten by sharks and that sort of thing. And the Navy never knew they were missing.
Right here.
You said earlier in your talk with us that there was a lot of gasoline that was for ballast for the bomb. Yeah. What happened? Did you release some of the gasoline also, or what happened to the plane?
No, we brought it back with us.
Okay.
Never, waste not, want not.
Well, what did it do when he dropped the bomb? Didn't the
No, and you were okay afterwards, because it was in the back of the plane. The plane was under balance and everything. By that time, enough of the weight had been burned off that you didn't have to worry about it.
Okay, thank you.
Now here, and then we'll go.
How did you and the crew, how did you and the crew feel after you got back? You knew you'd done it. The government had announced you'd done it, except Japan wouldn't admit it. How did that affect y'all?
It's about what we expected. You know, we'd been accustomed to this sort of thing all during the war. You get accustomed to things after a while and this sort of stuff. And it was, keep in mind that one of the advantages we had during the war, we had broken the Japanese naval code. We had broken the Japanese diplomatic code and everything of this type. So we knew what they were doing and what they were, even almost what they were thinking and everything of that type. But, you know, I think it would have almost, we'd listen to the radio. We wanted to see if there's any announcement out of Tokyo about an atomic bomb. But they would not, well, in the first place, they had to fly their scientists. They had to round up their scientists. They had to take them down there and verify that it was an atomic bomb. And then everything of that type. And that took them a few days, or a day or so at least. So we didn't expect anything real soon. But within days after that, we did expect it. But by that time, Truman was already announcing we did it.
We have time for a couple more questions. Start here.
Nope. Oh, here?
Go ahead.
Oh.
no doubt what you did is undoubtedly heroic, and we're all pretty much stupefied by it and can't imagine being in your shoes. And as you've said, it's just part of your job, and in doing what you did, that was just your mission. But I can't help but wonder, after all the years you've spent talking about this and pondering it, at this point in your life, when you look back on your life, does it rank up there as one of the most important things, or is it just still a part of your job, the birth of children, being married, living and experiencing the joys of life? Where does it fit into that scheme of things? And do you look back with a different aspect on it now than you had when you were just a soldier doing your job?
Well, I'm going to take one of your phrases there. Where does it fit into the scheme of things? Almost down at the bottom, and this sort of thing. It wasn't important to me the rest of my life. I did follow the same thing. I finally got out of the service. I tried to get out right after the war, and they said, no, you're essential. You have to go to the Bikini atom bomb test. And I always figured out that guys who were smart enough to make an atomic bomb could tell what it was going to do to a ship without dropping it on it, and this sort of thing. But anyhow, I did. They said I was essential. I went over to the Bikini atom bomb test. We had a little contest to see who would drop the bomb over there. Our crew won by a very wide margin. Then he said, no, you guys can't do it anymore. A lot of things happened after the war. I was going to stay in the service. Tibbetts and Farabee did. We were all reserve officers at the time. When we got back from a leave and everything, we found out that West Pointers had replaced us all. The military knew that atomic weapons were going to be the weapons of the future and everything of that type. So I decided to get out. And hey, I've had an extremely fine life. Why do I do this now? I do it because people are interested in it and this sort of thing. I'm 86 years old. There's nothing else I can do but twiddle my thumbs and this sort of stuff. So basically, I go around and do this for, it's interesting. It's fun. It's been nice meeting you people and everything like that. But, am I going to get rich through it? My God, no. And this sort of, in fact, I need a new pair of shoes right now. But this sort of thing. But war experiences, and you'll find this as you talk to more veterans, and you people have up here, this AETN, is it, Tiffany? I don't know what it stands for, but anyhow, they're going around and interviewing a lot of veterans around here who have very, very interesting stories. But almost none of them will say that their lives were changed by it or anything like that. It was just part of something they did when they were young. It's over with. We went back. We got jobs. We raised family. And that was it. You forget about it. Until I retired from... the stupid people made me a vice president with DuPont. I don't know why they did. And that sort of thing. But I retired from that in 1985. And, in the last 20 years have been dull as a devil if I hadn't had this to do.
Last question.
Since you went over Hiroshima, have you been back since? And what was that like?
I have not been back to Hiroshima since then. I have been back to Tinian several times, and I can tell you the people at Tinian are the most patriotic people you ever saw, except about 2 years ago they decided they were going to have a large reunion of all of the veterans over there. I did not go back for that particular thing, and I'll probably not go back again. I'm getting too old for it. But that particular reunion all got together, and they turned it into, they invited the Japanese, and it all became a big old pity party for the Japanese and that sort of thing, which is the reason we did not go back to it. But you'll see a lot of film on it and everything else. But the people in Tinian are wonderful. They really are. I could tell you a lot of stories about them, but I'm not going to take up your time right now.
Let's thank Major Van Kirk for a great presentation. We have a reception over here to this side. stage right, and then books directly where you came in, and then he was also going to be available to talk to. Thank y'all for coming, and come back and see us.